Hello and welcome to Nzone Focus. I'm Alan Lee. We're delighted to be here at Auckland's Museum of Transport and Technology today to bring you our special Anzac Day programme. Now later on in the show I'll be talking to aviation historian Richard Williams about his new book which celebrates 100 years of flight in New Zealand. But first we'll be meeting some of the dedicated volunteers in the aviation workshop just behind us here about the many hours that they've got under their belt restoring some of these very special planes which are part of New Zealand's aviation history. Tucked around behind the big new hangar here at Motat is where you'll find the aviation workshop, and that's the home turf of collections manager Norm McKelvey. Norm, hello.
Hello there.
Hi, nice
Pleased to meet you.
It's a pretty impressive setup you've got here. How many people have you got working on?
There's around about 30 in today, but we've only got a very few on the Sunderland at the moment.
Average age?
Average age would be, it'd be a tough one, but some are in early 90s, some are heading towards late 70s and late 80s.
So what is it that keeps you all so young?
A little bit of perhaps comradeship, and when they start to get with the boys, it becomes a boys thing, and they thoroughly enjoy it.
This is the ultimate shed, really, isn't it?
And this is our workshop, yeah. This is a small Jerry sports aircraft, this one here, and this is what the boys are working on at the moment. Done in the days when they perhaps didn't have the sophisticated equipment they got as today. And this is the Avenger, the torpedo bomber used on carriers. They used them mainly for, they used them up in the islands in the Pacific. These are some of our BC boys, or the BC boys that belong to the Lancaster group, and they're doing repair work and making up a bomb, aren't you? A tall boy bomb.
Yep, 22,000 pound bomb. Those bombs fit in the Lancaster bomber and the bomber completely. Take the doors off, put it up, they'll take out all the weight they could out of the bomber to take 22,000 pound bomb.
So with the earthquake bomb, you didn't aim, you didn't drop it to hit the target, you steered it off one side and shook all the ground.
Thank you. Thanks, boys.
The guys you've got here really know their onions. They know the history.
Yeah. I don't know whether he can get in there, but it's some of the repair work that's carried out inside the aircraft and the delicate holes and places we have to hop up into from time to time.
So what is actually going on?
Graham's actually putting on the panel there, Graham, aren't you?
Oh, hey?
You're putting on the panels there, aren't you?
Yes, this is the one of the fuel tank bays.
All right.
145 gallon tank, and then this panel goes over the top here and secures it all together. And then this is where the bombs and torpedoes hung.
So where do your guys get the knowledge to actually fix these things?
Graham is ex-Air Force. There's a number of us that have had Air Force experience, and we're able to sort of pass that knowledge on to the other boys, and this is really what we do. And it's having the know-how and having the basic knowledge originally, and then from that we can apply it against any aeroplane. They all differ from there on, and that's when we quite often have to go back to the manual, even we do at times, to refresh our minds as to what it's all about.
Okay,
Keith is just repairing a spinner which fits on the front of the Mosquito.
Oh, right. Oh,
and
right.
because we haven't got parts, and this is where we have to make up and make do with things, because really to fit this on the aeroplane we haven't got the critical part. So we've had to make an inside section there for it to fit on, and Keith is doing some strap work here so it'll be locked on.
So this is the Mosquito.
Thanks, Keith.
It will.
The Mosquito was a very fast aircraft, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. It's a sandwich of balsa with ply on either side is basically it, and spruce spars. Very strong, composite, light, and a couple of good Merlins on it to pull it through the sky.
Yes, yeah.
No, they're very effective, those.
So how long would it take from the aircraft coming to you in bits, actually ready to go back on display?
Well, most of this stuff was acquired or given to the museum, donated to the museum, maybe right back in the 60s, or the people at the museum at the time went out and got it. My predecessor, Tom Crowell, was an excellent curator, as they called him in those days, and he went out and went down to farms and spoke with people, got the aircraft and out of the hen houses or whatever they were in, and brought them up to Motat. And of course the restoration didn't necessarily start right then and there. A lot of them went into storage. Yeah. And then as my generation have come along, we've picked up the aircraft and taken it from there. This is a gun door actually being made for the Mosquito. Although we're not all aircraft engineers, we use the skills of the people that we've got. Yes. And Chris is a very good carpenter.
That's fantastic.
And, well, cabinet maker, and is just an ideal man for a job just like this. Here we've had a Hastings tail wheel, and this was actually off a Hastings aircraft. Jim, just you'd like to show them the retraction of the gear? And you watch the lights, you'll see the lights change as there you go.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I see.
And of course, you can see the reds and the greens, and you can follow the flow of the fluid. Yeah. And then we come up to the Harvard. This will be hanging up in the air.
So the idea is that you can...
So you operate it from down here.
You can sit in here and see the...
Yeah.
See all...
Have a look in there and have a look in the bits and pieces.
Oh, I've always wanted to do this. Oh, yes.
So we've made it so that sort of it looks... This is really an instrument panel out of an air truck, but that gives you, you know, there's all your instrumentation, or some of it. There's a few switches and everything like that. And here, of course, is the controls, which are going to control the aeroplane. Yeah.
And I guess that gives them a much more of a sense of how you fly a plane. Yeah. That's fascinating. So what have we got out here on the hard standing outside?
Well, that's our Sunderland, donated back in the early 60s again, and of course the Solent flying boat.
This is
the DC-3.
DC-3.
And the Lodestar. Yeah. And I suppose we're a bit lucky that we've got, in the Lockheed stable, we've got a Lockheed Electra, and we've got the Lockheed Hudson in there, and we've got the Lockheed Ventura and the Lockheed Lodestar, so 4 from the Lockheed stable. So,
after a lifetime of working in the aviation industry, did you ever think when you started as a teenager that...
Never dreamt about it. Never thought that I would still be as keen on aeroplanes today as what I was when I was 16 and a half. When I really walked into here in '95, I sort of looked at all this hangar full here of aeroplanes, which was just down over here in those days, was just stacked with all the aeroplanes, or basically a lot of the aeroplanes that I'd worked on in my life. So,
felt like you were coming home.
Yeah, it really did. Yeah, that's, you know, that was my life spread in front of me.
Meticulous, innovative, and also completely voluntary. Every week, these enthusiastic experts give hours of their time to prepare the aircraft for display. One of them is Eddie Treadray, who's been working on the Solent for the last 26 years, a plane he first flew back in 1950. He's delighted that expansion plans include a much larger hangar, so that the planes which have been restored will now be preserved and protected for future generations.
The young people like to come and see what the old people did in the old days, and when they look at the aeroplanes now, after what we flew, they're quite astounded at the shapes of them. No propellers now, or very few, and so it's very interesting for the younger people.
Mac Betcherman has spent many hours restoring the Sunderland, which he flew in World War II. He says the plane was an easy one to fly, and he enjoyed the experience so much that aviation became a lifelong passion. He even built an amphibian for himself.
And I had no great problem with that either.
You see, that's what amazes me about this place. You say, I built my own amphibian like you do, like you do it, like everybody does it every day of the week. There's a real passion here, isn't there?
Oh yes, there is a passion. Yes.
Workshop volunteer Des Hall spent 12 years rebuilding the Lancaster bomber, a plane he flew during World War II. His memories of that time, both good and bad, are still as strong for him today as they were back then.
The first time I walked into it, I got a huge blast of déjà vu from the smells in the thing.
Oh, really?
It was extraordinary. Yeah, I have a good memory for scent, for smell. And it really hit me. There was hydraulic oil, engine oil, all sorts of stuff, you know.
What was it like flying them in World War II?
The first 3 trips were just a huge mass of new impressions, new smells, sounds, and quite a lot of fear in case you missed something or stuffed something up, you know. And then you bedded down to it. Morale used to go in a fairly recognised curve. It used to drop until you got to about the 13th or 14th trip. And if you'd survived that, you got an idea when you were going to survive. Yeah. And the morale started to go up a bit.
Yeah. It's probably hard for people who've never been through that experience to imagine knowing that every time you get in that plane, you do not know whether you come back.
No, well, you don't. There was one thing about an engineer's job. Remember, it was before the computer days. You had 6 fuel tanks, 4 engines, with different engine settings going on all the time. And you were kept a busy little boy looking after your fuel consumption, you know, because you had to hang on madly to that. And if you got a hole in the tank and lost a tank, then the sort of you really started to juggle across the wings, or lost an engine.
Is it important for young people to see that? Because they're I imagine that their impressions of warfare are very much governed by what they see on TV and movies.
Yes, it probably is. There are not many films that I can think of where you are shown the guts and the misery of it. There's too much glory. There's not much glory in war, really. You spend half your time terrified, and the other half trying to stay out of trouble. For us, of course, it wasn't the same as the fellas on the ground. We could do the whole thing in 6, 8 or 10 hours, and then it was all over. But up there in an aluminium can with 2,000 gallons of petrol there and 8 tons of high explosives there, you know, that's as long as you wanted, wasn't it? Yeah. It was for me anyway.
Yeah. So was it hard to come back and work on it again?
I enjoyed it. And because I was one of only 2 flight engineers they had to talk to. Well, how much pressure was in the tyres, you know, and all this stuff. What was your all-up weight for takeoff? What were your engine settings for takeoff? Stuff like this. And it's amazing how much is buried in the mind forever and a day. What we were aiming for was to restore that to a 1944 typical frontline bomber. And that's pretty well what it is if you get inside it. That's what you'll see here.
Great. Well, Des, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure talking to you.
Lovely to talk to you.
Thank you.
And we'll continue our special Anzac Day programme after the break, and we'll talk to aviation historian Richard Williams about this year's anniversary of 100 years of flight in New Zealand. Back soon. And welcome back to our special Anzac Day programme. With me is aviation historian Richard Williams, who not only has a lengthy aviation history himself, but he also has a special role here at Motat, archiving their unique collection of this country's aviation history. Well, Richard, reading the book and having met you beforehand, you're obviously passionate about the aviation history of New Zealand. Why?
Well, I've always had an interest in aviation right from when I was small. I was quite keen to get a job in aviation, and fortunately I got one in the NAC, it's New Zealand National Airways, in 1950 in Wellington. And from there on I've had a variety of jobs in the airline and Air New Zealand after the merger, and I've seen some great things and I've had some great experiences.
Since you've retired, you've been working here at Motat. What does that actually involve?
I had a call about 3 years ago from the librarian seeking a little help on identifying a photograph, and I quickly found out that they had so many collections to be catalogued. I was hooked, and from then on I've thoroughly enjoyed cataloguing these collections and seeing them into the library for posterity.
So how did the book come about?
My friend John Mounts and I were talking about a year ago, just this time, it came up that this year was going to be the centenary of aviation in New Zealand, and we knew that there was a lot of photographs in the Motat library that hadn't been seen or published before, and we had other colleagues who'd also taken photographs at air shows and elsewhere, and we put a proposal to Motat management that this book perhaps complement the aviation development hangar over the back here, and they readily agreed, and away we went.
Well, my favourite photo in the book is the one of the 747-400 over Mount Cook, because in lots of ways it sums up everything that the aviation history of New Zealand is all about.
Yes, we were keen to have a shot like that in the book, for it's our national flag carrier. The main reason for that flight was that Air New Zealand had recently introduced a new colour scheme, so that features on the aircraft.
Yeah, and the other one is that picture of the Spitfire.
Well, the Spitfire became famous during World War II and the Battle of Britain and later battles over Europe, and the aircraft was a high performance and flew very well in combat conditions and was much admired by the pilots who flew them. The Spitfire that features in the book was one of the Warbirds aircraft, and the features I think in the Warbirds over Wanaka show, and indeed is a stunning photograph, and the Spitfire legend will go on for years.
The interesting thing I think that comes out of the book is how central aviation is to us as a nation.
Yes, right from the 1930s, several visionaries in New Zealand saw the need for New Zealand to be linked with the United States and Europe and Asia and Australia, not only for commercial reasons but for military reasons. And the World War II hastened that activity along, and after World War II, of course, commercial reasons became all the more important, and Air New Zealand and other airlines pioneered and developed new routes, and as of today we're well connected with the world and have certainly conquered isolation.
Because one of the interesting things that comes out from the book is how many iconic New Zealand names. I mean, you think about George Bolton and Jean Batten. You know, those names are part of our history, and they're part of aviation history.
The Walsh Brothers Flying School that started in 1914 trained a lot of pilots for the World War I, and there were several air races out of that conflict. And after the war, several of those continued in commercial and military aviation. Key people were Sir Leonard Isett, who was certainly a great visionary on both military and civil aviation. The E.A. Gibson, who became a director of civil aviation, who helped develop wartime airfields and Pacific airfields. And other long-distance pilots who pioneered those long-distance flights that demonstrated the way for those international operations.
Yeah, it's interesting you mention the Walsh Brothers, because when most people talk about the history of aviation in New Zealand, they always talk about Richard Pearce, but you decided to start with the Walsh Brothers, so why was that?
Well, the Walsh Brothers were probably the greatest pioneers in that they saw a need to develop aviation in New Zealand, because New Zealand was a long, narrow, mountainous country, and there was a need for better transport, and aviation was going to provide those connections. And along with the Walsh Brothers, there was also Sir Henry Wigram in Christchurch, who pioneered the Canterbury Flying School, and other Sir Henry Wigley of Mount Cook Airlines, Ewan Dixon, and other pilots who were pioneering long-distance flights in New Zealand. And at the same time, there were trans-Tasman flights with Kingsford Smith and others. And immediately after the war, the airlines were up and running and running regular flights not only to Australia but Fiji and the other Pacific Islands, and that progressed on to Los Angeles, Asia and the UK. And Teal also had connections with other airlines like British Airways, and where Teal stopped, British Airways or Qantas would pick them up and take them on to distant destinations.
One of the interesting stories that you tell, which I'd never heard before, was the one about the, was it the Pacific Clipper?
Pan American.
That went to, it was supposed to be going back to Honolulu, but because of the attack on Pearl Harbor, took an 8,500 mile detour.
Yes, that was an interesting flight. The pilot discussed his predicament with Pan American management, and they decided to fly the aircraft from New Zealand up through New Caledonia, through Singapore, Middle East, to UK, and then back across to New York. And it was indeed the first round world long distance flight that involved New Zealand in that situation. An interesting little snippet on that flight was that at Singapore, I'm told that they didn't have the right aviation fuel for the Boeing Clipper, so they filled it with motor car fuel, and the aircraft safely flew on to the next destination, where it was able to fill up with real aviation fuel. Much to be said for the aviation engineering of those days. And even today, technology is still occurring, and new things are on the drawing board all the time.
Because one of the things that comes across is that we're only a small country at the bottom of the world, but in the aviation industry we seem to punch way above our weight.
We have airline relations with other airlines, and also relations with manufacturers, civil aviation authorities, and behind this is a New Zealand culture of doing things well and wanting to work with good technology. And it's not only aviation but agriculture, shipping and many other things in New Zealand that we do well.
I think if we ever need any evidence of New Zealand's love affair with the aviation industry, you only have to look at the end papers of your book, because there are 100 stamps with aeroplanes on them.
Yes, anything with aviation on the stamps is eagerly sought after, not only in New Zealand but overseas as well. But yes, there's certainly a great collection of stamps in New Zealand.
Well, Richard, it's a fascinating book, and thank you very much for all the dedication that it must have taken to put it together. We really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's our special Anzac Day programme for 2011. We'd like to thank the staff and volunteers here at Motat for allowing us to film and for giving up their valuable time to speak to us. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to being with you again next week. Bye for now.